Welcome to Christian Authors Community. We are authors helping authors. We get together once a week and have a roundtable discussion about how we can use our platforms to further the spread of the gospel of Jesus Christ. If you want to learn more about what we do or how to join us, head on over to our website at authorscommunity.net. Let's jump into today's meeting.
Some of you have met Parker, some of you haven't. Parker is in the great city of Detroit, or in that area anyway. She is the author of, I've lost track how many books now. Every time I turn around, she's putting out a new book. So she's got somewhere between 30 and 40. And she writes Christian romance and I don't know what all. She's also a podcaster. And she's going to be talking to us this morning about audiobooks. So, Parker, it's all yours.
What I'm going to do is talk to you about audiobooks today. And audiobooks, people are mystified by them, but they're not really that mystifying. And I hope after you look at this presentation, it's just really a general overview of what audiobooks are, why you should invest your time and money into them, and why they are so popular. And it's also showing you that you can really get in depth into this topic. But for right now, I just wanted to give you a general overview of the topic, okay? And some people may recognize some of the stars I have used throughout this presentation. I don't know if that means if we're all, getting more mature or not, but you may recognize some of the things in here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. So the first thing that I want you to is what you can expect from this presentation. You can expect to learn that audiobooks are old, audiobooks are new, audiobooks draw new readers, and audiobook production and costs. So we're going to talk about that. This is going to be a general overview, and after the end of the presentation, I'll be more than happy to take your questions about some specifics, okay? So the first thing is this: audiobooks are old. If you can just unmute yourself when I ask you this question, does anyone know who this gentleman is?
Orson Welles.
Yes, Orson Welles. Yeah, he's he's one of my favorite actors from back in old Hollywood. He was notorious in a lot of different ways, but the movies that he produced were really high quality movies. I almost think he was a man before his time. But one of the things that made him big was when he did The War of the Worlds in radio. People were so afraid that we were being attacked by Martians. And I use this example to show you that audiobooks really are old. We love drama. We love to listen to drama. And some of the other ones here, who knows what Guiding Light is? Go ahead, you can answer if you know what Guiding Light is.
It's a soap opera.
It was a soap opera that started for 25 years on the radio, okay, right, before it went to television. And then we all know about Amos and Andy, which is also a radio drama. So once you understand that audiobooks are old and you see these examples, hopefully that part of it being mystifying comes out, stops being so mystifying. Okay, so you have The War of the Worlds is sci-fi, Guiding Light, which is a soap opera, and Amos and Andy, which is a comedy. Okay, but what audiobooks did was bring people together. And if you look here, with audiobooks, the format was that it was performed in a studio. It was only accessed via radio, phonograph, records, things of that nature. You could not access it everywhere. You had to have access to one of these mediums to listen to audiobooks, or to use a different term, dramas. You had to access it here. And then you had a wide cast of characters, sound effects, and narrators to help bring that story alive. Okay, if you could look at this picture here, you can see people gathering around the radio, getting ready to listen. All right, this is before television. This is before all the visual effects. Okay, books were very much in style then. Different things were very much in style. So now we have audiobooks are new. And what makes them new? Only accessible anywhere you are. Major platforms like Amazon, Chirp, via podcasts, and they have a range of content. So that's what I mean by audio. They're new because they're more easily accessible in different ways. Now here you see a man who is listening to an audiobook. Mind, he can be listening to anything, that's all we know. But he's listening to it where? To say is that they're accessible everywhere. They're provided on different platforms such as Amazon, Chirp via podcast, and they do have a wide range of content. Now, I use this picture to show about the new format of audiobooks because he's in an office. He's by himself. No one's there with him. And if you look at his eyes, he looks like he's thoroughly immersed in what he is listening to. What makes audiobooks newer now than what they were back in the day is that they are available in the digital format. Now, do some people recognize what some of these formats are? Like right here?
Recognize the MP3.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, MP3 is an audio file.
Yes, audio file. Mm-hmm.
M4A is also an audio file, but it can also be a movie file. And MOV, of course, is a
movie
file. But audiobooks can also be available in that.
Yeah. So I do this deliberately to show you that what's happening is that the format is now new and now accessible in different ways. Okay. So that's what makes it unique. Now, I want to quote Walt Disney here. And the way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing. So that's what Walt Disney said. And I say that because once you start to get into audiobooks, you find out that there is a wide range of opportunity turning your book into an audiobook. So audiobook attracts new readers. Now, the first readers you think about are people on the go. One of the things that happened when I was following the industry is there is a website called BookBub. And BookBub is a massive email list. They have thousands of people who subscribe to the mailing list to get discount books. One thing BookBub said during the pandemic, during 2020, the sale of audiobooks, now you may think this is weird, but the sale of audiobooks sort of went down. But why had it gone down? People weren't going to work. So think about it. They were all reading audiobooks while they were on their way to work. How many of us have listened to the radio when we're in traffic and you're invigorated by the discussion that people are talking about? So imagine you're stuck or you have a long drive or you're going back and forth. Many people who like audiobooks talk about how they like listening to something on the way back home or going to work. So that was one thing. So you're attracting readers who are on the go. They want to still read. They can't sit down and physically read a book, but they can listen to a book while they're in their car. This one was something that kind of shocked me, and I'm surprised I didn't know that, was the visually impaired. People who are blind can now have access to great audiobooks, even though they're blind. And that's a huge market if you think about it, and they can just listen to it, things of that nature. Then we have people who are remote workers, people who are homebound, people who are constantly at home or away from an office setting. They can listen to it there, or people who are at work. I know one lady was listening to an audiobook, and I was talking to her on the phone when I was working, and I was like, "Are you listening to me?" She was like, "No, I'm reading my book." So audiobooks do attract new readers, and these may be readers you may not have thought about. One thing you have to remember is that if you're trying to get your word out to many people, you want to try to get the word out in as many formats as possible. And we will all love to be the one to have our books in 3D. We want them in paperback, print, ebook, audiobook, and whatever other format that may come to mind. But we also know that costs do have an impact on how successful we are with that. So generally speaking, your team who creates your audiobooks consists of different parts. So we have a narrator. The narrator is the most important part, in my opinion, the most important part of the audiobook. One of the reasons why is because people who listen to audiobooks, they are going to have a personal attachment to the narrator. They have the ability to lead the reader on this journey. Their voice is what matters. Recently, we had one of my books is being turned to audiobook, and I listened to the narrator that the company selected, and I said, I hate his voice. I don't think I can listen to him for 10 hours, okay? So that's very important. So you do have to understand that the narrator is a very important part of this piece. Then you also have people who are called audiobook producers. They not only narrate, but they take care of other parts and other aspects of the production, such as the quality, the compression of the file, and other little tidbits that go along with producing your audiobook. So it's not just the narrator, it's all these other aspects involved. Put it on various distribution platforms like Amazon, Chirp, or even a website, all these things. So there are audiobook producers. You also have the option of doing it yourself. So imagine you can also be your narrator. You can also produce the book. You can make sure the quality of the file is up to industry standards and all that kind of stuff. So here are 3 different ways you can think about producing your audiobook. You can have just a narrator. You can have an audiobook producer who takes a lot of the work away from you, or you can do all the work. It really depends on a number of factors. Some people say, well, it costs too much money, so I'm just going to do it myself. But you have to consider, if I do it myself, how is that going to sound? You know, there's nothing like listening to someone with that really nasally voice over and over again. Do you have the voice to do that? Now, there are some wonderful tools out there, such as voice changers, voice modifiers that make doing narration a bit easier. They're not completely available to the public because there's some ethics involved. You may have heard of deep fakes. Well, these are deep fake voices. So you can have someone sound like, let's say, Morgan Freeman or James Earl Jones. But these are just some things for you to consider. How do you want to do it? If you are taking care of it, you can do a DIY and still hire a narrator. Let's say you'll take care of compressing the file, editing the file, listening to the quality, but you may hire a narrator to go ahead and read your book, okay? Or cast the narrators if you have multi points of view. So costs, this is the biggie when it comes to costs, and why a lot of people don't want to pay the money for an audiobook. The reason why is because no matter who you're using, you're going to pay money. For good quality work, you're going to pay money. So using providers like Amazon and Chirp, they give you options to have access to a variety of people on your team. Like if you go to Amazon and you're going to the audiobook, which is Audible, what you're going to do, you can select your own narrators. So what's really unique about that is that you can go into the search engine and say, I want a narrator who has a French accent, or I want a narrator who can produce a French accent or a Dutch accent, English accent. I want a narrator who sounds Midwestern, Southern, these things, depending on your book. If you're more likely, if you're doing like fictional and your book takes place, say in Louisiana, you may want a narrator who sounds like they're from Louisiana or can mimic that voice. I'm going to show you the cover of my audiobook that I had produced. With my book, I had several characters. I had 2 narrators, one for each point of view, because I write romance. So the one point of view was female and the other point of view was male. But both of them had to work with different accents. So the female narrator was able to have an accent of a French European woman, a French Caribbean woman, and a man who had been a former slave. And so she was able to modulate her voice to bring those characters to life. The male character, the male narrator, he also had to do the same thing. And he was able to, which I thought was very clever, he was able to modulate his voice to sound Native American, to sound like a person who was a former slave, to sound like a Southerner who was like the stereotypical slave overseer type of thing, and other little tidbits like a little boy, a woman. So Amazon gives you the opportunity to search for those type of narrators with those type of parameters. And then what you can do is decide how you want to pay. You can pay for completed work. You can pay for royalty share. I'll talk about that in a minute. With independent companies, they can offer you a wide range of services. So they can produce your book, they can put it on platforms, they can work with Amazon and Chirp, but it is going to cost money because they're adding their costs up there with the other things you're thinking about. I use an independent company for my audiobook, and I'll talk about that in a minute. If you do it yourself, this is what a lot of people may like. It gives you complete control, but you have to remember you bear all the cost and are responsible for every aspect. And no matter who's producing it or what's producing the audiobook, it's going to cost money because quality is the key. One thing that, especially as Christian creators and Christian producers, we don't want to give the Lord crappy work. We just don't. We want to make sure we are giving him the very best possible. He gave us his best. Why don't we give him our best too? One thing that irritates me sometimes, and this is a personal opinion, is when Christian creators say, well, if the Lord wants me to do this, then he'll make me do it, or he'll give me this. No, go ahead and be intentional in what you're doing when you're giving your gift to the Lord. I don't like people say, well, I'm not going to market because if the Lord wants you to market, then he'll make it work. No, 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 no. Put your best foot forward. Go ahead, find out how to market yourself well. One thing that people don't know how to do with audiobooks is how to market them. But hopefully some of the places I told you where people who listen to audiobooks, where they listen to them, will give you some ideas of how to do that. When you do it yourself, you do have that complete control of it, but you do bear all the costs and responsibility. So you may do it yourself, narrate the book, but are you enunciating your words correctly? Do you know how to pronounce them? How does your accent sound? You have books with characters have accents to it. Do you pace yourself? Do you run your words through? Do you listen to it again? So there's a lot involved with doing audiobooks, which is why for me personally, I prefer to use an independent company. And I had a really great experience with the company I used. Are there any questions so far before I go to the next slide? And this is what I was talking about a minute ago, 2 major ways to pay. There are other ways you can pay, but if you use a service like Amazon, Chirp, or those kind of companies, they give you the opportunity to do what's called a royalty share. So you don't pay any costs up front. What Amazon does, which I'm more familiar with, Amazon allows you to select your narrator, and then you and your narrator decide that the narrator is going to produce the book, and then you're going to split the royalties. Okay, so the narrator gets 50%, you get 50%. However, with Amazon, they also get a big chunk of your royalty. So Amazon gets, I believe, unless they changed it, I believe they get 65% or 60% of your royalty. And then that is split, and then the rest of the royalty, which is 40%, is split between you and the narrator. Amazon is also quite aggressive in how long they keep the rights to your audiobook. They keep their rights for about 7 years. Okay, but a lot of people go this way because they don't have to pay money up front, but they do have to pay when it comes to royalty. And one of the reasons why a lot of authors like this particular method of royalty share is because the narrator is just as engaged in marketing this book just as you are, because the narrator wants to get paid for their work, and so do you. And you have 7 years to do that. So that's something to think about. For the other side where you pay for completed hours, if you pay for it completely, then all you have to do is make sure that it's uploaded to the platforms you want. Okay. Now, Amazon does have a thing where you can upload to their platform exclusively. And if you upload to their platform exclusively, you get 40% of royalty share. However, if you want to put your audiobook on their platforms and other platforms, Amazon reduces that royalty share to 25%. And Amazon is aggressive in how they try to keep your you to stay with them. They're very aggressive about that, which is why people are hoping some competitor comes along and changes that. But what I prefer, me personally, is that I don't want to share my royalties with anyone. I want to go ahead and pay the company to take care of what I need to take care of, and then I can put it where I need to put it. This is what I prefer. But it all comes down to what your budget tells you. You may want to do that, and you say, I can't do that, I'm going to go ahead and do the royalty share. Neither one is the good option or the right option. It really is what you prefer, what your budget tells you, what your personal convictions are. So you determine what you want to do with how you pay for your audiobooks. You can pay for it in increments, like with the royalty share. You can pay for it by doing the completed hour. And the completed hour is this. Some audiobooks go for 10 hours. So you're going to pay for 10 hours worth of work. And let's say the audiobook company or the narrator charges 150 hours per completed hour. So or we'll just make it easy, $100 per hour. So $100 per hour, 10 hours, you're paying $1,000 for your book. A gentleman I know who recently started to do audiobooks himself as a narrator, he came along and he started to charge, he was charging, let's say, $60, but that was way below. So this is my audiobook that I had completed. This audiobook cost me about $1,200. about $1,200, something like that. And it cost me that because of what I went through an independent company. But the thing is that I don't have to share my royalties with anyone. The book is already completed. I can put it on wherever I want to put it on, and I have that control. Here's the thing. The book is only 2 hours, about 2.5 hours. Okay, that's about it. But I pay that money because I went through an independent company, but the experience was well worth that price. It was worth it because I didn't have to look for the narrators because I have a busy schedule. I didn't want to look through narrators. I didn't want to try to listen to it to make sure that it meets the industry standards. I didn't have time to go through and check every word. I didn't have time to do any of that. So the convenience for me was paying this company to take care of that for me. And they contacted me when they said, hey, we based off your criteria, we were able to get 2 people to do this and this. Like in my book, in this particular book, I wanted to make sure that the female narrator can modulate her voice to sound like a Caribbean woman who speaks French, because this woman is Caribbean. And the other one, the guy, he had to be able to do the same thing, just to have that continuity. And I had to pay 2 narrators because I had 2 points of view going through the story. You don't have to do that. You could just have one narrator. It's up to you. So those are the nuances I say we can probably talk about a little bit later. But I enjoyed this. I enjoyed the process. I didn't have to do a lot. This was the best option for me. That may not be the same thing for you. So make sure you determine what you can do for yourself, what works for you, what are you willing to give up, take away, things of that nature. You have to do what's best for you. There's no right or wrong answer. If you notice too, you also have to get a cover that is unique for audiobook covers. So you have to, that's an additional cost too. So, and it's not a big cost. If you use your graphic designer who created your cover, you can also use that same graphic design artist to create a cover solely for the audiobook. All right, and I'm at the end of my presentation, and the only reason why I show this, guys, because most people know I'm a Star Trek fanatic, and in this episode of Star Trek, we didn't see him until later on in that particular episode. But he had a very distinctive voice. His name was Benjamin Finney. His character's name was Benjamin Finney, and he was mad at Captain Kirk, and so he faked his death. And you hear his voice, and it's just really mesmerizing, and it's deep, rich, and dark, and it has a maniacal twang to it. And it just shows you that if you really put a lot of work into your audiobook, you can have readers jumping at the bit to read your book. And readers will love to listen to what your audiobook has. So that's the end of my presentation. You got any questions?
Parker,
It's great. Parker, it was really great. I have a question about, do you know Audacity?
Yes.
Audacity.
Mm-hmm.
Is that worth dealing with at all or not?
Yeah, Audacity is, for those who don't know, Audacity is a audio software, and it's available for free. I use it when I'm editing my podcast. It is something to invest into if you don't have any money to buy, let's say, it's on the tip of my tongue. It's Mac. I forgot what it is, but it's
GarageBand?
Not GarageBand. I can't think of it right now, but Audacity is free. It is worth it. They do have tutorials you can use to access it, but it is, if you're going to be recording it, you can do it. You can definitely do it for free too.
Okay. And one more question.
Sure.
With audiobooks with Amazon, if you go that route, do you retain the copyright on that? Because you said that they retain exclusivity for sales, I'm guessing, for 7 years is what you're saying, right? Not the rights.
No, they exclaim exclusivity on the sales because it's 60-40, 65 or 30. I think it's, to be honest with you, I think it's 60-40. You get 40, they get 60. Okay. But they have the bigger distribution.
How does that work with copyright? Do you know when you're dealing with a different narrator?
With the narrator, they don't have any copyright. They don't have access to it. They're just narrating and producing the work. So they don't have access to it.
So they're just like an independent contractor doing it. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thanks. Okay.
Parker?
Yes.
Are the formats different if you're uploading to Audible or to Chirp?
Yeah, there are different formats. And they do that because that's how you keep them from overlapping, because you could take one format, do it to Audible, one format, do it to Chirp. And Audible does that it's a market thing. You know how you keep the competition going.
Okay, thanks.
Parker, do you get to audition the speakers or the actors?
Sure do. That's what Audible and Chirp also supply, is that ability to narrate, which is probably the fun part. That's really the fun part, because you get to say, you give them a text to read. It could be a chapter or whatever their requirements are. Some narrators say, well, only give me 4,000 words or 5,000 words, just enough for you to test their voice. And that's the fun part. That really is, because you get to see, oh, that person sounded bad. Oh, that's the person sounded good. They match my characters, whatever.
Yeah, in Chicago, where I'm from, there are a lot of schools for actors, and I was just thinking that you can probably tap into that character.
Oh yeah.
Set more cheaply than a full professional.
Yeah, and actors, they also, you can find them on Audible too, because it's another way to make money. The lady who did my audiobook, she is a well-known voice actress. She also played on an episode of Star Trek. She wasn't the big wig, but she was one of the people on Star Trek. And she did an audiobook that won an award recently. And she's very versatile in accents. I mean, extremely versatile in accents, because I like to have a nice, diverse characters and stuff like that when I write historicals, you know. So yeah, you can have actors on there. They're just looking for another way to make money. So yeah. Mm-hmm. Well,
if you go through Parker, if you go through Amazon, then is it the same that it is in other formats? You get an author copy, you can distribute them, or does that not go that way with audiobooks? I don't know.
It depends on the provider that you're going for. You have to understand. So Amazon, and I'm saying Amazon, but it's actually Audible, but they're owned by Amazon. So they have the bigger distribution. They have access to all our data. That's what makes them really quite terrifying. I'm just being honest. I'm not trying to be weird, but it's just they have access to so much data. To me, that's their goal, is our data. They know what my buying habits are. They know what I read. I read a ton of books all the time. So that's what they have. But you're paying for access in a way to that data. That's why authors are willing to give up 60% of their royalties, because Amazon can, and you got to pay to play though, but Amazon can really distribute that to the people who are going to access it. But then you have Chirp, which is coming along, and they're changing and becoming a competitor against Audible. See, so other companies are coming along trying to take that market away, you know, and so even some of the big publishers want to do it too, because Amazon is that aggressive. They have very aggressive tactics, and that's not a bad thing. I'm not saying a bad thing, but you know, if I make most of my money on Amazon, do I really want to leave?
So Parker,
I'm just wondering if you can order author copies of your audiobook like you can paperbacks and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, they give it to you. Like when they give you the completed file, you actually give you the completed file. Okay. Yeah, and you can listen to each chapter. But then what Amazon does, they give you codes. So they give you about 25 codes, one for the US, one for the UK. And some for the US, some for the UK, and that helps generate things. So you can give people a code. Hey, if you want a code of my audiobook, here's a code for you to download, put it here, and you can listen to my book. And those are 25 free audiobook copies. So notice that they are free. They are free. And that's helping generate interest in your audiobook.
So Parker?
Yeah.
Hi. Do you, so you go after both Chirp and Audible, or do you only go for the exclusivity with Audible, you yourself?
Yeah, I go with Audible because most of my money comes from Amazon. All of my money comes from Amazon. I mean, I was able to quit work to do this. See what I'm saying? So all my money comes from Amazon. Do I like that when I look back on? Like, if they get mad at me, oh my gosh, you know, they could cut me off. So hopefully, I mentioned Chirp because they are a competitor, and Chirp partner with BookBub. So imagine if BookBub, which is a massive email list, had partnered with Amazon. That would have given them a massive edge in the market. But they partnered with Chirp, and so now people are going with Chirp. And one of the authors I know who went to Chirp, she said she prefers Chirp because they do have a more variety of options. They're not as locked down as Amazon is.
But you can do both, but then you limit your royalty back to you. That's what you said earlier.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yep.
Mhm.
Parker,
Yes.
this is Maury.
Hey, Maury.
I researched the merits of trying to do my book in audio with people in the business, in the industry, a couple of them who were familiar with my book, with the manuscript, with the way it read. And as I note early in the book, this isn't a 2-hour airplane book. It requires some intentional brain time. I encourage the reader to have his Bible close at hand because I have a ton of scriptural references in my book, both bracketed and actually written out in the manuscript itself. And you can almost pick a paragraph anywhere in the book. And as I endeavor to read it in audible form and incorporate the scriptural references in brackets and or in parentheses, et cetera, it's just the net response to me from the people I consulted with was this would be a very difficult book to put in audio form if you want your reader to put in the brain time to understand what it is that you're writing and to understand the points that you're trying to make in what you've written. And so basically I backed away from it at that point because I found myself agreeing with what they were saying. I mean, I pick up a paragraph or two or three and start reading, and not having listened to audiobooks that have a lot of scriptural references, I can't honestly say I've heard how they flow, but I took the perspectives that I was given from the people that do this and backed away from it. Was that not a good decision, you think?
I just think you have to reformat your book for the audio world. I'm thinking of someone who's unsaved and blind who needs to hear your book and to hear your book. I would almost suggest going to a company who does like drama. You can go to an independent company because they can work out and have, let's say, if you have scripture, let's say you have, your text, and then you can have another person like scripture reference here. And they can really float, make like almost a storyboard even. If you do if you want to see like a drama, pull out like a drama, you could probably do better going with a company that does it instead of just a narrator. You see what I'm saying? Because a company will have more access to different people, cast members, flow chart, all that kind of stuff. Kind of like if you were online listening to, what was that? I was watching Archive 81, which is based off a podcast, right? They have different sound effects and things of that nature to give you that immersive quality. So instead of you seeing it as a nonfiction, maybe you want to see it as creative nonfiction. Maybe your audiobook will be translated better to creative nonfiction. So you don't have to change all your story, but maybe you can work with a company who can help you say, okay, I need this scripture reference to be said here. They will have to work it out. It will cost money, but if you really are gung-ho on making it that way, you just have to work it. You know what I mean? Does any of that help?
Well, I understand your point. I get your
Mhm.
point. I guess I'm trying to think about. I mean, there's a couple of you who've read my book. I guess I'd be curious, Kim, as you think about, and/or Nancy, having read my book, trying to put it into some audio form, or Steve too. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Do you think it would be an easy task?
I don't think it would. I think Parker has a valid point with, it would be a great opportunity for people who are visually impaired. I think that's really, really true. But and I think, Parker, you're right that if I were gonna read Maury's book, that I would want another voice doing his references.
Mm-hmm.
For that, because he has, it's an excellent book.
Mm-hmm.
It's an excellent book, but it is, when Maury and I talked, and Maury, I'm not leaving you out, we talked about, great for study. And it really is a study guide. It really is a guide in waking people up. So it's very valid points. So in that place, you would want it on every format, but I can see that it would be very difficult to put into an audiobook.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you there. I don't know, Maury. You talked about doing a study guide with it.
Well, you know what? I'm sorry. Now I'm thinking about it. Maybe instead of turning it into an audiobook, you can still turn it into an audio format. You can do it as a podcast, or you can do it as a limited podcast, a limited series where you're talking about your text. Who knows it better than you? You do. You know it really good. You know it great. There are a lot of people who take their study notes. Like one guy, I think he's the preacher with a glass or something like that. I can't remember his podcast name, but he takes his study notes and he turns it to a podcast. See what I mean? So that way you don't have to fit. You can just truncate it. You could do, let's say, 12 weeks on chapters 1 through 4. And you could pre-record it and talk about it, put on a podcast, and still make it available. So it's not an audio book, but it is in audio format. Plus, you get an opportunity to probably get some new listeners, new readers, you know what I'm saying? And you can say, hey, if you really want to know it, you could buy the book, see? And for who's just impaired, they can listen to your podcast and get it. Because with writers are really, how do I say this kindly? Writers are marketing shy. We are marketing shy, marketing. We just want the book to talk for us. We forget the book is not a person. It comes from us, you know what I mean? So I will almost suggest, instead of trying to turn to audio book, you put it in audio format, and that's through a podcast.
Parker.
He's put so much into this. Maury, you've put so much into this, and there's so much knowledge. We talked about podcasts too. I really think that might be the route, because he's put so much into this book,
Mm-hmm. And you could make it a limited. You can make it a limited podcast. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to be like you have to do it for the rest of your life or anything. You could just make it 12-week series. 6 months with Maury. Whatever you want to do. Talk about your book, and then you can sell it on your website. Sell the audios on your website.
Parker, you frighten me. I shudder to think having to expose people to 6 months of me. Oh my goodness.
I'm just saying,
oh my goodness.
I remember Walter Martin and Norma Geisler, they were doing this stuff, they did the verse, they went through the Bible, verse by verse, you can do the same thing, just in the trunk, just do it your way,
Well, I appreciate that. It's very great food for thought. It sort of frightens me a little bit to think that somebody would actually be willing to sit and listen, even though, or see or listen to me for, babble on for an hour or whatever. But
if they connect with your voice, if they connect with you, what happened? One lady, she told me, I'm not saying this to be boastful, but she said, your voice just really soothing and guiding. I can listen to it all the time. What happens? They start to connect with your voice. So instead of someone else being a narrator, you're the one connecting that listener to your work. You're the one building that bond, and that's why I showed the picture of the guy who had the headphones and his phone, because he's looking like he's listening, he's listening to something that is engaging him. And you'd be surprised more. There are a lot of people looking for really deep content nowadays. They're kind of tired of the fluff. They're looking to be challenged. They're looking to have critical thinking skills invigorated and activated, if you will. So a lot of people are tired of just the fluff, because you can't argue, you can't do this, you can't do that. And then when you really want to go deep down and dirty into something, they can't do, because you may make someone mad. You know what I'm saying? So the podcast kind of gives that person who wants to listen to you, isolate your listeners into really digging down into the word.
Well, thank you.
Parker, go ahead, Maury.
I was just saying thank you very much, Parker. Kim, thank you for
I'll be
your
willing
thoughts.
to help you. Just let me know. I'll be willing to help you. So let me know.
I appreciate it.
I'm in practically the same boat as Maury, where my book is about the entire book of Revelation plus like 8 chapters more and verses here and there. And
Nice.
I've gotten stumped putting together my audiobook, in part because of how do I make it flow. And I get that. But so I'm trying to picture what a podcast. So this would be like where I'm just discussing the concepts without using any of the script of my book, just taking what is in my head is the idea.
Yeah, you can do that. Remember, you're practicing, because like you said, if it's so difficult to turn to audiobook, then you want to turn to audio format. And that it's like the screenplay in the book. The book may be much richer and deeper, but not everybody's going to read that 1,000-page book. They'll watch the movie. When you get to the movie, what happens? They took the part out with the guy running with the giraffe. Why did they take out the giraffe? He was the biggest part of the story. He had a giraffe, And they said, we can't have a giraffe jumping on top of the guy's shoulder in the story. We had to take that out. So instead they had a monkey do it, right? You know what I'm saying? So you have to just readjust your format to match that. And what I like with podcasts too is that you can give it to you can pre-record all your shows, and load them up in whatever frequency you like. The biggest thing, and I always say, because I have 2 people now joining my podcast network, and the biggest thing I always say is consistency. That's the biggest thing. People are worried about numbers. It doesn't matter. You can have the numbers, but if you're not consistent, who's going to follow you? You know what I mean? It's like YouTube, people who are professional YouTube content creators, what do? They constantly create new content all the time. We may hate their content. There's one guy who just opens doors for people, I think, and people looking at him. You know, my nephew has a YouTube channel. He just puts stuff that, I love him. Okay, so he can put whatever he wants on his channel, but I kind of go like, oh my gosh, but he has subscribers. So it's just that consistency. If you're trying to build a podcast following, but if you're just trying to build like a limited series that you can sell the audio formats on your website, which is another way of making some income. You can say, okay, if you don't want to go through the book, but you want to get the meat of it, you can download my MP3s for X number per file, or here's part 1 at X number, here's part 2, here's part 3. You see what I'm saying? So I have to get really creative with that.
Mm-hmm.
Does that help anybody? Does that help?
Yeah, I wanted to mention, Parker, that 2 things you guys were talking about. I recently read a book where the author was talking about enjoying listening to audiobooks, and she made a comment that she really likes to listen to this one author because he reads his own books. And I believe they were nonfiction, but I've started the process of reading some of mine. You know, it's a little tricky, you know, and you hope you have a good enough voice, or you can get the mic or whatever you need to have a good enough voice. But I thought that was a good point, because I appreciate that too, listening to audiobooks, and that's not always possible, especially if you have multiple voices. You need to have different people. But I thought that was interesting that she brought that up, because it is nice to hear how someone, you know, Maury, if you were reading yours on a podcast, to hear how that person actually reads what they wrote, because they know it better than anybody else. We know what we meant, you know, the best. But as you were speaking, I thought, yeah, why can't we just put these on our podcast? You know, could create a podcast where you're doing that. But also, I thought, you know, is there available anywhere yet? We have serial reading like Kindle Vella, but maybe there will come about serial readings, you know, audio readings like that.
That's what a podcast format does.
Well, a podcast would be the same, but I mean, like Amazon doesn't offer that, but we can do it on our own podcast. So I think that is a great idea and an alternative to the other, especially for some type books. So I like that idea for your book, Maury, and you know, I would like to do something with that. Mm-hmm. Pardon me?
Like I said, anyone else may be struggling with, especially if you have, especially scholars. And does anyone know who Heiser is? Dr. Heiser? He did the Unseen Realm. All right, anyway. So Heiser, and he is a wonderful nonfiction writer. Translating that into fiction is a little bit difficult. Okay, so he wanted to incorporate his nonfiction to his fiction, and not every scholar is a great fiction writer. I'm sorry. So, and I was reading it, I fell asleep like, dude, this is boring. I'm sorry. And so, if I was reading nonfiction, I would be like, okay, I'm gaining information, knowledge. But if you're trying to entertain me through the vehicle of fiction, and no. So you have to think about how that's going to translate. So one thing I think about with authors who want to do their own books, you can, but you have to practice. The one guy who started doing his, he practiced, and now he has that software that can modulate his voice, so he can sound like a woman, he can sound like a little boy if he needs to. The only thing about those is that they're limited, because people can use them from obviously other nefarious and underhanded things, you know, but they are limiting that when it comes to deep fakes, things of that nature. I kind of went off track there, so I'm coming back. But I encourage anyone, that's why podcasts work. And I say, you don't have to make podcasts. Like, I've been doing podcasting for 9 years. You don't have to do it that long. If you just want to create the audio format and make it available to buy on your website, you can do that too. That way you're not using Amazon, you're not using any other platform. Your website now becomes a vehicle where you make money. And you may only sell one in a month. Doesn't matter. That was one. You'd have to share that royalty with nobody. See what I mean?
I actually listened to a podcast, and the guy that runs the podcast, he does documents, and the documents are probably boring to read, very long, very boring. And he has a friend who, I don't know whether he was an actor in high school or what have you, but he brings the document to life. Yep. So they have a podcast together, The main person will introduce what the document is, and starts the show, and then this person will read it, and it comes to life, and you can understand it, and it's energetic, can be in character. So totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. So I think and I'm not trying to do weird. I'm just saying, I particularly don't care for Ben Shapiro's voice. I don't care for his voice. I'm surprised he has people who follow him, because his voice, when I listen, it's just, my ear hurts, but people follow him. So it's not necessarily you have to sound like James Earl Jones or Morgan Freeman, Jude Law, who's a very good book narrator, and some of these other people, but it's how people connect with you, or how they bond with you. You know what I mean? They may bond with you not just because of your voice, but because you're witty, because you're quick on the step. So that's what you want to think about. If you can't create an audiobook, if you put your content, so you're going to be a content creator now you're switching hats, you're creating content that is in conjunction with your book. Like, Maura, you should probably think about just doing study guides for each chapter. Put the scriptures there, have your study guides, and then you can make that available. That's another way of making income. You can buy the study guide for chapter 1, buy the study guide for chapter 2, study guide for chapter 3. And unless that's not really important to you, but you can start really breaking up your information and putting it, truncating it in parts, because people have to learn in parts. Anyone else? Any thoughts, questions, concerns? Parker, you got it wrong.
Parker,
Yeah.
To Nancy's comment, I think there was a trend a while back that really the author must, or at least that's what we thought here in Central Missouri, because everybody got on the old, we need to do audiobook wagon, and then none of us could make it through. But anyway, the author has to read it, because there's a higher interest level in audiobooks sitting over at the Flying J on Highway 44 for if the author's actually read it. Do you find that to be true, or is that really not the case because there are so many narrators now?
There's a lot of narrators. I think if an author wants to have that personal connection, they can. They just have to practice. There's a guy who, I don't know if he still does it now, but he was offering audiobook narration classes. And he told people, if you want to take my class, you have to read every day out loud some book, no matter what book it is. You have to read it every day out loud. And so I took that advice. And he said, but most people won't do it. And I was one of the most people. And this is why. But I read it. It was very interesting. The more you start to read out loud, at first you're tripping over words, your mouth gets all tongue-tied. But I was doing readings during the pandemic with my readers group. Every night I would read a chapter from one of my books. And the readers, sometimes they joined, sometimes they didn't. But I kept reading. The first 2 times I kept tripping over my words. I felt like I'm a blithering idiot. I can't read my own book, right? But you know what happened? You started to get better. So that's the office. You want to do your own work, you just got to be consistent. Read your book, and you may be reading it like, this is horrible, because sometimes when you read it out loud, you go, that's a horrible sentence. Of course the giraffe didn't walk. He ran. Giraffes don't walk away from a tiger. They run from tigers, but you have the giraffe walked away from the tiger. I mean, it's a dead giraffe that walks, but at the same time, as you learn how to be consistent, learn, then also say, I think I can do this. Like when I listened to the young lady who did my audiobook, I noticed how she didn't rush. She really enunciated her words. She paused. And I was thinking, okay, this is where the punctuation comes in at now. So now I have to know where to put a comma at. Really, I really have to know where to put commas at, because I hate commas. Commas are like my most hated punctuation in books ever. I never know where they go, right? And people say, well, put a comma when you breathe. I said, what if you're fat? I mean, there's a comma every other word there, So you really want to, if you want to do it yourself, just practice and keep practicing, and then record yourself, evaluate yourself, have someone else evaluate you, get critique, do it again, evaluate. A lot of authors tend to have, new authors, I should say, are not always open to that critique, because we're so close to our writing. It is from our heart. The Lord gave us this message, gave us a story, gave us this poem, whatever it is. It's so close to our hearts. And when you say you need to do this better, well, you don't like me, see? And that's not necessarily the case. Shimrit had a question. Shimri?
Shimri, you're right.
Yes. I was wondering if I had thought about, well, what if I did my book as a podcast? It's actually a fiction book. But I was wondering, what is the financial gain, in doing it as a podcast, in comparison to doing it as an audiobook? I mean, do you get, I've never done a podcast. I don't know anything about them. Do you get income from podcasts?
You can. It depends on the platform you choose to distribute to. So it depends on your platform. Like my platform is Blog Talk Radio. If I chose to, they can monetize my podcast by adding commercials from people who advertise with them. Okay. Another one, Anchor, they actually pay you money, but you have to put their information in your podcast every single show. Like you take a break, we'll be back after this message. Why do you like Anchor? Anchor does it. Blah, blah. All right. And then you can also get advertising revenues, people who want to advertise with your podcast. Like I do, I offer that, but I haven't really worked on it because it's just me. So I haven't really worked on it. But I'm like I said, more opportunities are coming, and it's something I'm going to have to really take consideration of. And you would charge, but the advertisers are going to ask, okay, what's your reach? How many people are listening to your podcast? 4 people. Why would I want to pay $500 to listen to your podcast? You see, to put my stuff on there. So they're going to ask those kind of questions too. You can also make it that's why I kind of suggested with Maury with his stuff to make it a paid file that they can download. You may charge like $1.99 or whatever, and they can download the file, stuff like that. For a podcast, though, it does depend on what platform you distribute to and how they give out money. Like Spotify, you get money from there different ways, just like that. So you have to look up that platform, like Podbean, Podcast, Blog Talk, Spotify, iHeartRadio. Just figure out which one you want to be at. But if you're just looking to get followers too, it's also dependent on the platform as well. And I think,
isn't it fair to say, excuse me, Parker,
Go ahead, Maury.
Isn't it fair to say that, because you, for better or for worse, planted a seed that I'm starting to grow already. Isn't it fair to say that if what I could see coming out of this approach, if I'm podcasting and actually reading through my book, my problem will be I can get off on tangents, and I'll have to really learn and stay disciplined and follow basically the flow of the book itself. But what I would hope is that it will create followers, which ultimately we all hope, as we gain followers, leads to more book sales. Because if people like what they see and or hear, ideally, they're going to want to get the document you're reading and or teaching from in their hands. So, I mean, it doesn't seem to be an instant revenue generator like an audiobook would be, but maybe in the long term, it will help you increase your audience at a more rapid pace. I mean, does that seem to
I
make
think
sense?
so. Yeah, because right now my podcast is it's heard all over, but I have a major following now in India. I have a lot of people who follow me now in India, which is great. And I went on the Indian platform that gave me that opportunity. And if you think about how many people in India, the 2 platforms in India, I forgot their names right now. They have 150 million people who subscribe to their platform. Insane. Insane. Okay. Yes, I'm sorry.
Can I just say really quick, Shamri, too? I know I started this because my virtual assistant person told me to. So, but it's read a minute and a half and drop it on Instagram once a week. So I'm reading out of different books and just dropping it so that I'm practicing reading not that long, and then just dropping it so that I'm just building a little market there and practicing reading. So, I mean, before I leap into whatever, that's what I'm trying. I don't know. For what it's worth.
Well, the thing is, if you don't try, if you don't jump into it, because sometimes we think it, plan, and I'm all for it. Don't misunderstand. But sometimes you just don't jump and do it. You'll never do it. You will never do it because you're waiting for, and I'm saying this jokingly, you wait for the stars to align, waiting for, you get a sign from the Lord, you wait for the sun to come up. You got to sometimes just jump, make your mistakes. Oops, sorry. I mean, and I use myself as an example only because I feel like I've made a lot of mistakes, so you don't have to. When I first did my podcast, I used to do my podcast now for an hour and a half, 90 minutes. Now I've knocked it down to 30 minutes because more people can kind of listen to it in 30 minutes as opposed to an hour or hour and a half. When I broadcast live though, I do an hour because I've had breaks and I have people call in, talk to the guests and that nature. So you just learn, and you're not going to learn unless you do it. You're not going to make mistakes. Even if you did your own audiobook, right? And you put out there and you hear somebody say, this person who narrated book sucked. Oh my gosh, did you hear that voice? You go, well, not to do that anymore. But you won't know unless you get the data going. You know what I mean? Anything else? It's about 12 o'clock. Well, my time is 12 o'clock, so I don't know if there's anything else.
I just want to thank you. Did a great job. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Parker.
Thank you. Thank you. And
great, Parker.
I'll have a follow-up to this on the blog next week. And if you have any questions, please, please, please feel free to connect with me.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If this topic has helped you out in any way, we'd love for you to take just a second and leave us a comment or leave us a thumbs up on the video. It really goes a long way in helping us and helping the YouTube algorithm know that this is valuable content and to share it to other people. If you want to learn more about Christian Authors Community, we would encourage you to visit our website at authorscommunity.net. We hope that you guys have a wonderful day.